The Arizona desert lay wide and empty, under a sky still the color of cold ash. A lone barn and house stood small against the scrub, the only marks on the land for miles. The gate was open, no splintered wood, no broken chain. Just the latch lifted clean in the dark, the way a man lifts it when he knows exactly where to find it. Hoofprints ran northeast from the empty pen, steady, unhurried, and beside them walked the clear print of a boot. The iron shoes on those hooves carried a mark no Chiricahua farrier would ever use. A man stepped from the house, coffee cooling in his hand. He stopped at the fence post, set the cup down, went to one knee in the dust. His fingers found the tracks. From the ridge beyond, the desert watched him back. The colt was gone. That was the first thing Haddon Briggs understood when he walked out to the colder side of the barn, that Tuesday morning in July of 1874. The gate hung open. Not broken, not forced, just open. Like someone had lifted the latch, clean and quiet, and walked Pilgrim right out into the dark, while Haddon slept 8 feet away from the house. He stood there with his coffee going cold in his hand. Just stood. The Arizona sky was doing that thing it did in early morning. That pale violet thing before the heat came and burned all the color out of everything. Beautiful, maybe. If you were the kind of man who noticed beauty. Haddon wasn't. Not anymore. He'd been the kind of man who noticed beauty once, back when there was someone standing beside him to notice it with. But that was 3 years ago, and 3 years was long enough to learn that some things don't come back. He set the coffee on the fence post, crouched down, pressed 2 fingers into the dust beside the gate, hoof prints, heading northeast, 4 of them, deep and clean. Which meant Pilgrim hadn't been running, hadn't been spooked, had been led. Someone had walked alongside him, calm, keeping him quiet. Someone who knew how to handle a horse that didn't trust strangers. Pilgrim didn't trust anybody. Except Haddon and Rebecca. But Rebecca had been gone 3 years now, and that was a thought Haddon put back in its box before it got any further. He stood, followed the tracks to the edge of his property line. Watched them continue northeast. Kept going past the scrub brush, past the dry creek bed that hadn't run water since spring, past the low ridge that marked where Haddon's land ended and everything else began, northeast. He knew what was northeast. Everybody in Red Rock Flats knew what was northeast. The Chiricahua Apache held that ground, had held it long before there was a Red Rock Flats. Long before there was a territorial office in Tucson making maps that pretended otherwise. Most men in this part of Arizona Territory operated under a simple policy. You didn't go east of the creek. The kind of policy that kept a man alive and also kept a man ignorant. But out here in 1874, ignorance was frequently the same thing as survival, and nobody was too proud to admit it. Haddon had been east of the creek. Years ago, different life, different job. He'd ridden with the Territorial Marshal Service for a while in the 60s. Back when the work felt like it meant something, and before he'd learned better. He'd ridden those eastern territories enough times to understand the land and some of the people who lived on it. Then he met Rebecca, and she'd said very quietly, very simply, that she hadn't married a man who made his living getting shot at, so he'd stopped. Just like that, 14 years of frontier instinct, put away in a drawer like a pocket knife you don't carry anymore, but can't quite bring yourself to throw out. He went back inside now, poured the cold coffee out, made fresh. Drank it standing at the window, watching the light come up over the ridge, watching the way the shadow of the fence posts stretched long and thin across the dust like fingers pointing east, northeast specifically. He put his coffee cup in the basin, went to the bedroom, opened the drawer. The knife went in his boot, the Colt went in his holster. He left the rifle on the rack. That was intentional. A rifle says you came to shoot someone. A pistol says you came prepared. A man who walks into a Chiricahua camp with only a belt gun is either very stupid or very confident. And the difference between those two things is sometimes invisible from the outside, which was exactly the kind of impression Haddon wanted to make. He was saddling his other horse, the dun mare, solid and dull, nothing like Pilgrim. When he heard boots on the road, 3 men. His nearest neighbor, Walt Ferris, who ran cattle 2 miles south and had a good honest face. and the kind of worry in it now that came from knowing his neighbor, and knowing the direction those tracks went. Tom Liddell from the feed store, thin and cautious, a man who measured twice and cut once in everything he did, and Gideon Pruett. Gideon Pruett was interesting, because Gideon Pruett's general store was on the other side of town, and Haddon's property wasn't on anybody's way to anywhere. Gideon had come specifically, heard the commotion, Walt said. Though there hadn't been any commotion, Haddon kept cinching the saddle. Tracks go northeast, Tom offered. I know. A silence. Then Gideon stepped forward. Gideon Pruett was the kind of man who always stepped forward. Broad through the chest, easy smile. The sort of face that looked like it had never held a thought it was ashamed of. He'd been running the general store in Red Rock Flats for 11 years, and everybody liked him. Hadn't liked him well enough, or was in the process right now of cataloging that liking, and wondering if it had ever been based on anything real. Gideon put his hand on Haddon's shoulder, big hand. Heavy. It's a horse, Haddon. Haddon looked at the hand, then at Gideon's face. I know what it is. Apache don't give things back. You know that. I know a lot of things. You go out there alone, you don't come back. That's not a theory. That's what's happened to every man who's tried. Haddon pulled the girth tight. 3 men, he said. 6 years. Different circumstances each time. I know the stories. Then you know. I know you're burning daylight standing on my property. Haddon took the reins. I appreciate you coming. I do. But this isn't a discussion. Gideon's hand dropped. The easy smile stayed. Which was the thing about Gideon. The smile never quite left. Even when the warmth behind it did, like a fire that had gone out but left the shape of the flames in the ash. At least wait for Sheriff Combs, Walt said. Combs won't move on this without authorization from the territorial office, and authorization takes 3 weeks minimum. Haddon stepped up and swung into the saddle. Pilgrim will be halfway to Mexico in 3 weeks. He looked at the 3 of them from up on the dun. Go home, he said, not mean, not harsh, just final. He turned the mare northeast and didn't look back. He rode for the better part of 2 hours before his mind settled enough to let him think about the horse. The horse specifically, and why the horse mattered, and why the answer to that question was the real reason. He was riding northeast, alone toward Chiricahua territory, while every sensible man in Red Rock Flats thought he'd lost his mind. The thing about Pilgrim was that he wasn't supposed to exist. Haddon had bought him at auction in Tucson in the spring of 1869, 2 months after the wedding, with money they absolutely could not spare. Rebecca had come with him to the auction. She'd stood in the dust in her good blue dress and watched the gray colt pace the small pen and said nothing, which was how Haddon knew she wanted him to buy the horse. Rebecca said nothing loudest when she wanted something most. He'd paid $43 for it, which was $38 more than he could afford, which meant they ate beans and cornbread for most of that summer, and she never once complained. Not once. She'd just wake up in the morning and scratch Pilgrim behind the ears while the coffee boiled, talking to him in that low voice she used for things she cared about, and didn't stand in the doorway, watching and think that he had managed somehow against considerable odds to build a life worth living. The colt grew into a horse that was too smart for his own good, and too stubborn to be truly useful, and absolutely devoted to the woman who talked to him every morning. He wasn't fast. He wasn't particularly strong. He had opinions about everything and expressed them loudly and at inconvenient times. He was the kind of horse that made experienced horsemen shake their heads and inexperienced horsemen quit the profession entirely. Rebecca loved him completely. Then the fever came through in the summer of 1871. Fast. Ugly. The kind of fever that didn't negotiate, that didn't respond to the usual measures, that moved through a person the way fire moves through dry grass, fast and total, and leaving nothing behind that looked like what had been there before. Rebecca was gone in 9 days. 9 days. Haddon had spent the 14 years since then learning how to carry that number. He was still learning, and Pilgrim was what was left. The gray horse with the darker stripe down his nose, too stubborn to be truly useful, too smart to be ignored, pacing the fence line every morning waiting for a woman, who wasn't coming back. He'd waited for months. Long past the point where any sensible animal would have accepted the new situation and moved on. Haddon understood that. He didn't say so out loud, but he understood it. So when he rode northeast this Tuesday morning in July of 1874, he wasn't chasing $43. He wasn't chasing a useful piece of livestock. He was chasing the last living connection to a life that had been better than he deserved, and he would ride into whatever territory the tracks led him to. Because there was no version of this where Haddon Briggs went home without his horse. He was thinking all of this when he found the shoe print that changed everything. It was small, easy to miss. The kind of thing you'd step over without registering if your mind was on something else, if you were moving fast, if you were the angry rancher looking for his horse that someone had clearly been counting on him to be. A section of hoof track, half visible in the hard ground where the soil changed from dust to the rockier caliche that ran along the base of the ridge. The print itself wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the shape of the shoe. Haddon dismounted, crouched, pulled his hat back, and took a long look. The shoe was set with the toe clips inward. A farrier's choice, not standard, but not uncommon. He'd seen it before, back in his Marshall days. It was a style used by a specific smith in Tucson named Carver, who did work primarily for the freight companies and the larger ranching operations. Men who needed consistent shoeing across large numbers of animals, and valued a smith who could be predictable and fast, and produce the same result every time. Apache didn't shoe their horses, didn't need to, didn't want to. The Chiricahua ran their horses on rock and scrub from birth, and the hooves thickened accordingly, dense and capable in ways that shod hooves couldn't match on this terrain. A shod horse in Apache territory was a liability, not an asset. Any Apache horseman worth the name knew that. It was basic, it was fundamental. So Haddon stood up slowly, looked northeast, then looked back southwest, the way he'd come. Someone had walked Pilgrim out of his gate in the dark. Someone who knew how to handle a horse that didn't trust strangers. Because Pilgrim hadn't been spooked, hadn't run, had simply gone along, as though the person walking beside him was familiar. Someone whose own horse was shod by a specific Tucson smith who worked primarily for commercial operations. Someone who very much wanted the tracks to go northeast. Someone who had reason to believe that a rancher following those tracks, angry, scared, armed, possibly stupid with grief, would ride into Apache territory and create exactly the kind of incident that certain people might find useful, he thought. About Gideon Pruitt's hand on his shoulder, heavy, deliberate. The easy smile that stayed even when the warmth left it, the fact that Gideon's store was on the other side of town and Haddon's property wasn't on the way to anywhere, and Gideon had still shown up that morning, before the dew was off the scrub. Grass. He thought about the 3 ranchers in the valley who'd sold their properties in the last 18 months. Sold them quick, sold them cheap, sold them to a land consortium out of Tucson that Haddon had never heard of before, but that seemed to have appeared very suddenly, and with a great deal of ready money. He thought about all of this for a while. Then he kept riding northeast, because Pilgrim was still out there somewhere, regardless of who had moved him and why. The tracks still led this direction. There was no version of this where Haddon went home without his horse. But he was thinking now in a different way than he'd been thinking an hour ago. Not the blunt thinking of a man chasing property, but the careful thinking of a man who has spent 14 years learning to read ground and has just found something written in it that he doesn't like at all. He cataloged what he knew. He cataloged what he suspected. He separated the 2 categories carefully, the way you separate grain from chaff, not by throwing one away, but by knowing which is which, because you'll need both eventually, and confusing them is how men make mistakes that get people killed. Think slow, move careful. That's what keeps you alive, he rode. The Chiricahua camp announced itself before he saw it smoke first. That particular quality of wood smoke that came from cooking fires, deeper, more complex than signal fires. Different from the diffuse drift of a prairie burn. It had the smell of morning routine in it, of food being prepared, of people going about the ordinary business of being alive. Then sound. Not much, but enough. The rhythm of activity, voices at a distance. A dog somewhere doing the specific kind of barking that meant it had noticed something, but wasn't alarmed yet. Then the ground itself changed. The way ground always changes around habitation, packed hard by passage, by living, by the weight of people moving through the same spaces, day after day, until their paths are written into the earth. Haddon stopped the dun on a low rise, below maybe 300 yards. The camp spread along a shallow draw. A cluster of wiki-ups, arranged with the kind of logic that wasn't immediately obvious to outside eyes but had its own internal sense, built for the specific landscape, positioned for specific advantages. Good placement on high ground to the north and east. Water somewhere close. Judging by the vegetation along the draw, clear sight lines in every direction. Including the direction Haddon was currently sitting on a horse in plain sight. He didn't try to hide. That was the decision, and it was the right one. A man who tries to approach a Kirikawa camp without being seen as a threat. Someone with something to hide, someone planning something. A man who sits still on a rise in clear daylight, not advancing, not retreating. Hands visible, making himself easy to see is a message. The message is, I see you seeing me. I'm not running, I'm not attacking. I'm waiting for you to decide what to do about me. Which was a position of vulnerability that also happened to be, in this specific situation, the strongest position available. It took about 4 minutes. He counted the seconds, an old martial habit, the kind of thing that gives the mind something to do, when the body has to stay very still. 4 minutes, then 6 riders came up the slope, not fast, not slow, controlled and deliberate, the kind of pace that communicated they weren't alarmed, but they weren't casual either. They fanned out around him, 2 on each side, 2 staying slightly back. Good positioning. They'd done this before. They knew exactly what they were doing. Hadn't kept his hands visible on the saddle horn. Didn't reach for anything. Didn't speak first. The lead rider was young. Maybe 25. Dark eyes that missed nothing. Moving, from Haddon's face to his hands to his saddle, to the place where a rifle would be, if he'd brought one, and back to his face. Cataloging and assessing, in the practiced way of someone who has done this many times. Hazen said, in the slow, careful Spanish 20 years ago working the border country. I'm looking for my horse. I don't come for trouble. I want to speak with your chief. The young man said nothing. I know the horse is here, Haddon continued. I'm not making accusations. I just want to talk, still nothing. Then the young man said something in Chiricahua, quick, to one of the riders behind him. A short exchange. Some assessment happening that Haddon couldn't follow. Then the young man looked at Haddon again. Come, he said. In English. Flat and clear, they took his colt before they entered the camp. Haddon let them. That was also intentional. Also the right decision. A man who fights over his sidearm at the gate is a man who's already lost the negotiation. A man who lets it go is a man who's saying, my weapon is not what I came here with. What I came here with is words. They led him on foot through the outer edge of the camp. He kept his eyes moving, taking in information without the tense alertness of a man cataloging threats, more the way of a man genuinely trying to understand what he was looking at. Women working at tasks that required the particular focused attention of people who have been doing the same work so long it has become meditative. Children watching from a distance, not hiding, just watching, curious and cautious and not frightened, which told Haddon something about how this camp usually conducted itself. Old men sitting in the shade of a brush shelter, talking or not talking. Existing in the comfortable way of people who have long since stopped, needing to prove anything, normal life. The kind of normal life that was very easy to forget was happening out here, when the only stories you heard were the bad ones. When the only information that traveled between communities was the information of conflict and suspicion and loss. He was taken to a larger wiki-up near the center of the camp. Outside it, a man sat on a flat stone. Broken Arrow, Haddon knew the name. Had heard it from men in the territorial service years ago, from Apache scouts who'd worked alongside the army, from the careful reports of agents who'd actually spent time in Chiricahua territory, rather than just filing paperwork about it. The descriptions were consistent. Tall for an Apache, past 50 but carrying it well. A face that had been through every kind of weather and arrived at a particular kind of stillness on the other side. Not emptiness, stillness, the kind that comes from having processed a great deal and chosen what to keep. The man looked up at Haddon, said nothing. Haddon said nothing. The silence lasted long enough to be a statement about what kind of conversation this was going to be. Then Broken Arrow said something to the young man who'd escorted Haddon in, a brief exchange. Then the chief looked at Haddon directly and said, in slow but clear English, "Sit." Haddon sat, not on a rock, on the ground, cross-legged, level, not positioning himself above or below, not taking a seat of authority or a position of submission. Just sitting on the ground the way two men might sit if they were simply two men and not representatives of anything larger than themselves. Broken Arrow watched this. A long pause, then almost imperceptibly. Something in his posture changed. Not much. But Haddon had spent a career learning to read the small things, and he read this one. Something had shifted in the chief's assessment. Not to trust. Trust wasn't built in a single gesture, but to openness, to the possibility of a different kind of conversation than the one Broken Arrow had been prepared for. The conversation was slow. Not because either man lacked intelligence. Both of them were clearly thinking faster than they were speaking. Slow because both men understood, with the instinct of people who have navigated difficult ground before, that speaking carefully was how you built something that lasted, and speaking fast was how you built something that collapsed. Haddon explained about Pilgrim. Not the full story, not Rebecca, not the auction, not the $43, and the beans and cornbread and the life that had been better than he deserved. He wasn't there to make the chief feel sorry for him. He explained the facts. The horse was gone. The tracks came this direction. He'd followed the tracks. He wasn't accusing anyone of anything. He wanted to know what the chief knew. Broken Arrow listened, completely still, the kind of stillness that was active, not passive, the stillness of a man absorbing everything, including the things that weren't being said. When Haddon finished, Broken Arrow said, "You came alone?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because 2 men or 10 coming this direction looks like a raiding party. 1 man coming this direction looks like what it is." Broken Arrow considered this. "What is it?" "A man looking for his horse." Another pause. "You left your long gun," Broken Arrow said. "I noticed you noticed." Something moved at the corner of the chief's mouth. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, and near enough that Haddon filed it away carefully. "The horse," Broken Arrow said. "The gray." With the mark on his nose, Haddon felt something loosen in his chest. Just slightly, just enough. "Yes, we found him 3 days ago, and there it was." "Where?" "Between the creek and the north ridge, standing in open ground. Not running, not badly hurt, a small cut on his front leg, already healing. Like an animal that had been kept somewhere closed for a time and then released." A pause on that word. Released, not stolen. Released hadn't kept his face still. "And what did the tracks tell you?" Broken Arrow asked. Haddon looked at the chief directly. "They told me someone wanted me to think. Apache took my horse." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one had weight to it. The weight of recognition, of 2 people arriving at the same understanding from different directions. Broken Arrow said, "The horse is here. He is well. I'd like to see him." The chief stood. Haddon stood. They walked together, not side by side exactly, but not leader and prisoner either. Something in between. 2 men moving in the same direction, which was itself a kind of statement. Pilgrim was in a small enclosure near the creek, which Haddon could now hear. A thin trickle, but real water in dry country, and someone had put his horse where there was water and grass and shade. The gray horse was standing at the far side of the pen, head up, ears forward, doing his suspicious assessment of the universe, that he applied to everything new. Then he saw Haddon. The horse crossed the pen in about 4 seconds. Not running. Pilgrim didn't run. That wasn't his style. He moved fast and direct the way he did everything. And he put his head against Haddon's chest and stayed there, while Haddon stood with one hand on the horse's neck and didn't say anything, and didn't need to. Broken Arrow watched this. Haddon became aware, after a moment, that the chief was watching not with impatience or calculation, but with something more like recognition. The way you look at something you've seen before, in a different form, in a different life, in a time you don't talk about much. My wife's horse died 2 years ago, Broken Arrow said. Haddon kept his hand on Pilgrim's neck. I'm sorry, she died 4 years ago. The horse lasted 2 years after. Then one morning he was gone. A pause. We buried him. Haddon looked at the chief. We buried him. Broken Arrow said again because he carried her. That is worth something. They stood there for a moment. 2 men with their separate losses, standing in the quiet of an enclosure in the Arizona desert, where a gray horse was pressing his head against a chest he knew. Then they went back to the fire. The young man who'd escorted Haddon into camp brought food, dried meat, flatbread, something else that Haddon didn't recognize and didn't ask about, because a man who asks about his food is a man who's already decided not to trust it, and distrust was exactly what Haddon was trying to move away from. He ate. Broken Arrow watched him eat, then ate himself. The sharing of food was not casual here, and Haddon knew it from his martial years. It meant something. He acknowledged it by eating without comment, without ceremony, just eating, which was the right way to receive it. There is a problem, Broken Arrow said eventually. Beyond my horse, beyond your horse. Haddon waited for the past 4 months. The chief said, measure each word. Horses have gone missing from this territory. From your settlements, from our camps, not always many, sometimes 1 or 2, but regular, patient, a pause, like someone who is in no hurry, who knows they will not be caught. Because both sides think the other side did it. Broken Arrow looked at him. Each time a horse goes missing from a ranch, Haddon said slowly, settlers blame Apache. Each time it happens in your camps, your people have reason to distrust settlers. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody compares stories. So nobody sees the pattern. A long silence. You are fast, Broken Arrow said. I've been thinking since I found the shoe print on the ridge. What shoe print? Haddon told him. The farrier's clip pattern, the Tucson Smith. The fact that Apache didn't shoe their horses and had no reason to start. Broken Arrow was quiet for a long time after that. 3 of my horses, he said finally. In the past month, how many ranchers in the area have lost animals? I don't speak with ranchers. No. But your scouts moved through that territory. A pause. Then, at least 7 properties, perhaps more. We did not think to count. Haddon thought about Gideon Pruitt's hand on his shoulder, the weight of it, the deliberateness. It's a horse, Haddon. He thought about 7 ranchers sold and gone in 18 months. Land consortium out of Tucson. Ready money appearing quickly, no hesitation. He set these thoughts aside for now. Not because they weren't important, because they needed more before they became useful, and speculation without evidence was just noise. Your horse is here, Broken Arrow said. You can take him. Haddon looked up. But nothing, the chief said. And the word landed flat and clean in the air between them. Take your horse. Go home. Haddon didn't move. That's not what I'm going to do, he said. Broken Arrow looked at him for a long moment. There's a pattern here, Haddon said. You see it and I see it. Whoever is running this, whoever moved my horse specifically to send me in this direction, they're counting on us not talking to each other. They're counting on exactly what almost happened today. Me riding in here with assumptions and maybe a weapon, and you meeting me the way you'd meet a threat. He paused. If I go home now, I've got a horseback and a problem I can't prove, and whoever did this loses a few days at most before they try something else. The chief was very still. What do you want? He said. I want to know if your scouts have seen anything. Tracks, movement, any sign of where the stolen horses are being held. A long silence. And if they have, then I'd like to go look. Broken Arrow stood, walked away from the fire. Stood for a while at the edge of the camp's light, looking east into the desert dark. Whatever he was weighing, being weighed in a place Haddon couldn't see and wouldn't try to. After a while, Broken Arrow came back. He sat down. There is a canyon, he said, 3 hours east and slightly south. Our scouts have seen movement there. Riders on irregular schedules. Horses that don't belong to anyone in our territory. Haddon waited. We did not go closer, the chief said, because going closer would look like raiding. and we are trying very hard this season not to give anyone a reason to say, "We are raiding, I understand that, do you?" "Yes," Haddon said. "I spent 6 years in the Territorial Marshal Service. I understand exactly what it means to be the group that everyone expects to cause problems, so that when problems happen, the explanation is already written." Something shifted in Broken Arrow's eyes, the beginning of recalibration. The moment when a man stops seeing the category and starts seeing the specific person inside it. "You were a lawman," Broken Arrow said. "Was. Why did you stop?" Hadn't thought about how to answer that. "My wife asked me to," a pause, "and now she is gone." "Yes, and you are still not a lawman." "No, but you rode alone into this camp." "Yes." Broken Arrow looked at him for a long time. "That is either very stupid," the chief said, "or very principled." "I know the stories go both ways on that," Haddon said, and this time Broken Arrow did smile. Briefly. Like light through a crack in something that had been closed for a long time. They gave him back his colt just before dark. Haddon stood at the edge of the camp, Pilgrim beside him on a lead, the dun mare waiting where he'd left her. He'd half expected her to be gone, but she was there. Patient and dull, exactly as he'd left her. The young scout who'd met him on the ridge led Pilgrim out and handed over the lead rope without ceremony. Haddon ran his hand down Pilgrim's left foreleg. The cut Broken Arrow had mentioned, just above the fetlock, scabbing clean, treated. Someone had put something on it, some poultice or preparation he didn't recognize that smelled of sage, and something more medicinal, something that had clearly been applied with care. He looked up at the young scout. "Someone doctored this." The young man said nothing, which was its own answer. Haddon nodded. He didn't say thank you out loud. He didn't know enough about Chiricahua custom to know if that was right or wrong and wasn't going to guess. Instead, he looked at the young man for a moment, in the way he hoped communicated that he understood what had been done and why it mattered. Then he mounted the dun. Broken Arrow appeared at the edge of the firelight. Didn't walk toward him. Just stood there, visible, present. Haddon raised one hand. The chief looked at him. "Tomorrow morning," Haddon said. "You said 3 hours east." Broken Arrow said, "You'll need to be rested." Which was not a confirmation and not a refusal. Which was, Haddon was beginning to understand exactly how this man communicated anything he intended to follow through on. "I'll be here at dawn," Haddon said. He turned the dun southwest. Pilgrim fell in beside him without being asked. No lead needed now, just matching pace the way he always had, the way he'd done, since he was a colt following Rebecca around the Tucson property, before they'd come out to Red Rock Flats, built the house, started the life that turned out to be shorter than either of them had planned. The night was cooling fast. It always did out here. The heat broke like something brittle, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour. Haddon pulled his coat closer and let his mind work. He thought about the shoe print on the ridge, Carver's clip pattern, copied or taught. Whoever had done this wasn't improvising. They'd thought it through. Thought through the kind of evidence they'd leave. Thought through who was likely to follow it, and how. Thought through what would happen when that person arrived in Apache territory, angry and armed. He thought about Gideon Pruitt's hand. It's a horse, Haddon. The weight of that hand. The deliberateness of it. The smile that stayed even when the warmth left. He thought about the land consortium. 7 ranchers, sold and gone. Ready money. No hesitation. The kind of operation that needed both an instigator and a protector. Someone to create the panic and someone above that person to keep the legal machinery looking the other way while the purchases were made. Someone organized this, not a drifter, not an opportunist. Someone who had been in this territory long enough to understand it. Long enough to know the patterns of distrust between communities, to know which ranchers were financially vulnerable, to know that a few stolen horses in the right places would create exactly the right kind of low-level chaos. Someone who had connections in Tucson, both with the buyers and with the officials, who would need to be kept quiet. 11 years, he thought about that number. He set it aside, because it was still only suspicion, and suspicion wasn't proof. But he kept it close, the way you keep a name that fits a face you've seen but can't yet place. He made camp 2 miles south of the Chiricahua territory line, in a shallow arroyo that provided cover without trapping him. Old martial habit. Always know where the exits are. Always choose ground that gives you options. He built no fire. Ate jerky and hardtack and drank sparingly from his canteen. Pilgrim stood close, not tied. The horse stayed because he chose to. And that was the only kind of staying that meant anything. A lesson Haddon had learned from Rebecca and applied to horses and most other things in his life. He lay back on his bedroll and looked at the stars coming out one by one over the desert and thought about tomorrow, about the canyon 3 hours east, about what he'd find there, about who he'd need to bring back with him to make the numbers work, about how to do this in a way that left both communities standing on the other side of it rather than collapsed into mutual recrimination and the kind of violence that would serve exactly the people he was trying to stop. Complicated problems required careful solutions. He closed his eyes. He slept dreamlessly, for the first time in a long time. In the morning, before first light, he was already saddled and heading back northeast. Pilgrim walked beside him without being asked, both of them heading back toward the camp, toward the chief who had said nothing, and meant yes, toward whatever the canyon east held. The dawn came up red and orange over the hills. Broken Arrow was waiting at the edge of camp when Haddon arrived. 2 scouts behind him. Ready, the chief looked at Haddon for a moment. Then at Pilgrim. "You brought both horses," he said. "Pilgrim doesn't do well, left alone." Another almost smile. "Then he is like all useful things." He said something to his scouts in Chiricahua. Haddon checked his cinch, and then they rode east together, 4 men, 4 horses, 2 languages, 1 direction, into the morning light that was already going gold over the Arizona hills. Think slow, move careful, but move. The youngest scout, the one with the quick eyes who'd met Haddon on the ridge, said the canyon's name once, quietly, pointing southeast. Something with hard consonants and a long vowel at the end that Haddon's mouth wasn't built for. He'd learned the name, or a version of it he could approximate. Something like Taza, which the older scout had used once as a form of address. He didn't try to repeat the canyon's name, just filed it away the way he filed everything. Not in words, but in the shape of the thing. A canyon, 3 hours east and slightly south, movement inside. Horses that didn't belong. They rode, the morning was still cool enough that breath showed faint and white before the sun got serious about the day. Pilgrim moved alongside Haddon without a lead. The dun mare Haddon had left at the camp. Broken Arrow had offered one of his own horses in exchange, a short roan with feet made for this rocky terrain. Haddon had accepted. A man who refuses a fair exchange is a man who doesn't believe the relationship is real. Broken Arrow rode to Haddon's left, not behind, not in front, left, which meant something in Chiricahua custom. Probably something about equality or partnership, or the particular respect between men who have decided to trust each other provisionally and are willing to see where that goes. Haddon didn't know the exact meaning. He put it in the category of things that felt respectful rather than strategic and left it there. They didn't talk much that first hour. The terrain demanded attention. Loose shale on the lower slopes. Then, denser scrub as they moved into the higher country where the saguaro thinned, and the rock changed color from pale tan to something darker and redder, like rust that had been settling into the stone for centuries. Beautiful country. The kind that people who'd never had to survive in it called barren, which said more about their imagination than about the land. There was nothing barren about it. It was full of things that had figured out how to survive on very little, which was its own kind of extravagance. Tatza pulled up short on a rise. Still, listening hadn't stopped. Broken Arrow raised one hand, complete silence. Except for the wind in the scrub and the sound that drifted up from below. Horses. Not moving, just the ambient sound of a large group of animals in an enclosed space. The collective breathing and shifting and occasional stamp of many horses gathered in one place. A lot of horses. They went around, stayed high. Came to a position on the ridge where they could see down into the canyon without being visible from below. The canyon revealed itself gradually, the way canyons do, First the suggestion of it in the change of wind and light, then the walls themselves. Red rock, 60 feet high on the north side, lower on the south. Narrow entrance from the west, widening to a broad floor maybe 200 yards across at its widest, and inside horses Haddon counted from the ridge, taking his time, being careful, 26. Maybe 28. The movement made it hard to be certain. Different colors, different sizes. Ranch horses mixed with smaller, leaner animals. Some still branded, which was telling. Someone wasn't worried enough about being found to burn the brands off, which meant either they planned to move the horses soon, or they felt very, very safe. And men, 12 visible, possibly more inside the single structure. A rough wooden canvas shelter built into the north wall, a fire pit in the center of the canyon floor, supplies stacked against the rock. This wasn't a temporary camp. This had been here for weeks at minimum. Someone had been planning this for a long time. Haddon felt the old martial instinct wake up and take inventory. The part of him that had spent a decade asking, what is this really, beneath what it appears to be? What this appeared to be was a horse theft operation, a big one. What this was, beneath that, was a real estate scheme. He was certain of it now in the way you get certain of things that haven't been proven yet, but fit every fact you have. The horses weren't the profit. The panic was the profit. The panic that made ranchers sell. The desperation prices those ranchers accepted when they sold. The land acquired at emergency rates by a consortium with ready money and very few questions. And someone was letting the Apache take the blame. Both sides robbed, both sides furious at each other. And someone in the middle, collecting the difference. He thought of Gideon Pruett's hand heavy. Deliberate. It's a horse. Haddon Broken Arrow crouched beside him. 3 of those horses, he said quietly. I know, the bay with the white foot. That one was my nephew's. Haddon found it. Yes, we'll get it back, he said. Broken Arrow looked at him. You say that like you've decided. I have. There are 12 men down there at least. And 4 of us, I know the count. A pause. You are either very stupid or very principled. Yes, you said that yesterday. I was being diplomatic yesterday. Something flickered in Haddon. Something adjacent to a laugh that he kept from his face. We don't go in today, he said. We go back. We plan. We come back with enough to make the numbers work. They talked through the structure of it. How many men Broken Arrow could bring who understood the difference between recovering what was stolen and taking more. How many men Haddon could bring from Red Rock Flats who were steady enough to follow a plan rather than a feeling. The arithmetic of a situation that had to be resolved by surrender rather than bloodshed, because dead men don't testify and was what Haddon needed. Someone organized this, Haddon said, finally looking at the thought he'd been circling for 2 days. Someone with knowledge of both communities, the patterns, the trust deficits, how each side would react to provocation. Broken Arrow waited. That person is still out there, Haddon said. Still trusted. And they will not stop just because we recover the horses. A long silence. You know who it is, Broken Arrow said. It wasn't a question. I have a strong suspicion. But suspicion isn't proof. Broken Arrow looked out over the canyon. In my experience, men who build power on other people's fear are very reluctant to let go of it. Yes. And men who feel it slipping become dangerous. Yes. So we need more than the horses, the chief said. We need the person. Yes. The wind moved through the brush on the ridge top, dry and warm, carrying the smell of dust and sage. All right, Broken Arrow said, just that. Like a door opening. They rode back mostly in silence, which was fine. Haddon had always found that the most useful conversations happened in the silences between words, in the space where 2 people decided what kind of thing they were building together. Words were just the confirmation of decisions already made in quieter parts of the mind. He was thinking about Gideon Pruett. 11 years in Red Rock Flats. Came out west to build something, he always said. And everybody nodded, because that was the story everyone told about themselves in this territory. But what had Gideon been building, specifically? The general store. Profitable in the way of any monopoly, but not unusually so. The house on the hill north of Main Street. Bigger than a bachelor needed. The membership in the Territorial Land Registry Office. which Haddon had glimpsed once through an open door, the kind of membership that gave you early notice of land available for acquisition. Early notice, meaning before anyone else knew it was for sale, meaning someone had to be convinced to sell before they'd actually decided. Panic was very effective at convincing people. The timing worked. The land consortium had appeared 18 months ago, visibly. But Gideon had been in Red Rock Flats. 11 years of cultivating trust. 11 years of learning which ranchers were financially marginal, which were losing the fight against drought and debt and distance, which ones a few stolen horses and a general atmosphere of fear might push over the edge into selling. 11 years of easy smile. At the midday stop, in the shade of a rock overhang, Taza pulled his horse alongside Haddon's while they picked through a boulder field, said in careful English, "Your horse. He follows you without rope." "Yes." "How long?" 5 years. Taza watched Pilgrim for a moment. "My horse follows my sister. Is that a problem?" A pause. "No, I think maybe he has better judgment." Haddon glanced at him. The young man's face was perfectly serious. "Probably," Haddon said, and they rode on. At the rock overhang, they stopped and ate, and Haddon watched Broken Arrow and thought about two men who processed the world the same way. Internally, carefully, with a strong preference for understanding a situation completely before committing to action. It was a specific kind of loneliness, that preference, because most people moved faster, decided first, and understood later, and men like Haddon and apparently Broken Arrow spent a lot of time watching from the outside of things, seeing clearly, saying little. The man who organized this, Broken Arrow said, not looking up from his food. "He is someone your community trusts?" "Yes." "A man of standing?" "Yes." "And when this is finished, when it's clear what he has done," a pause. "Your community will not want to believe it." Haddon set down his food. "No, they won't. And some of them never will. Some of them never will." The thing about comfortable lies in small communities was that they functioned like load-bearing walls. Remove them, and the whole structure came down. Who we trusted, what we believed, how we understood ourselves. And people would rather keep the wall than admit it was hollow, even long after the hollow became obvious. "I've seen this," Broken Arrow said. "My people." A leader who served himself and said he served the tribe. When we learned the truth, half still defended him. Because to stop defending him was to admit they had been wrong to trust him. And that was worse for them than what he had done. Haddon looked at the chief. What happened to him? He is no longer a leader. And the half who defended him, they are still there, still quiet about it, still angry, but at the wrong things. A silence. "I'm sorry," Haddon said. Broken Arrow looked up. Something passed across his face. Surprise. Almost, but deeper than that. Like the expression you make when something reaches you that you'd learned not to expect. "Why do you apologize for it?" he said. "Because it's a hard thing. Leading people through a betrayal from inside takes more strength than any battle." The chief was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said, "just that." They were descending a long slope toward the lower desert when Taza pulled up hard, his hand flat. "Stop." Everyone stopped. Hadn't heard it. Faint, northwest of them, close, the sound of one person moving through brush, trying to move quietly and not quite managing it. The particular irregularity of human footsteps, the specific sound of someone in pain, moving as carefully as pain allows. Broken Arrow and the older scout moved in opposite directions without words, flanking, automatic. The coordination of men who'd worked together long enough that communication had become reflex. Haddon stayed with Taza. The young man's hand was on his weapon, not drawn, but ready. 20 seconds. The brush to the northwest parted. A man stumbled out. Apache. Older than Taza, younger than the older scout. Moving wrong. One arm held close to his side, clothes torn. The face of someone who had been managing serious pain for several days and had run out of capacity to manage it gracefully. He saw Broken Arrow first and stopped, said something. Fast and urgent, and with the specific relief of a man who has been alone in bad circumstances and has finally found people. Broken Arrow crossed to him quickly. Put his hand on the man's shoulder, steadying. Listening, the exchange lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then Broken Arrow turned to Haddon. His face was controlled, his eyes weren't. "This is Kesho," he said. "He has been with the camp for 2 weeks. Hadn't waited. We thought he had gone south. We thought—" He stopped. Something moved through his jaw. He was taken. By the men in the canyon. He has been held there for 12 days. 12 days. He escaped this morning. When one of the guards left to find water, Kesho was looking at Haddon with the focused intensity of someone who had spoken something bad and wasn't finished processing what came after it. His ribs were the issue. The older scout bound them with strips from his saddlebag, practical and matter-of-fact, the field medicine of men who had dealt with field injuries many times. "What does he know?" Haddon said. Broken Arrow spoke briefly to Kesho. The answer came back longer than the question, much longer. Broken Arrow listened, asked 1 or 2 short questions, nodded. Then he turned to Haddon. "He knows the name of the man who leads them." Haddon went still. He was not meant to hear it. But men in camps talk, and men who believe their prisoner doesn't understand English talk more freely than they should. A pause. "He speaks some English." "Enough. What name?" Broken Arrow looked at him. "Pruitt," he said, and there it was. Not a surprise. Not exactly. But there's a difference between believing something and hearing it confirmed, and that difference lives in the chest, not the head. Haddon felt it. A settling. Like something balanced on an edge, finally falling one direction. The relief of certainty even when the certainty was bad. "Gideon Pruitt," Haddon said. The men called him by first name only. But Kesho heard the full name once. In an argument between 2 of the riders about whether they were being paid what they were promised. "What else does he know?" Another exchange. Another, this time. "There is a list," Broken Arrow said. Kesho didn't see it, but he heard the men discuss it. Names of officials in the territorial government receiving payments to delay any official investigation into the land transfers. Men who would ensure that any complaint, from ranchers or from Apache, would be buried before it reached anyone with authority to act. Of course, Gideon had built that into the structure. A scheme like this, operating in the open over months, couldn't exist without protection above it. You needed someone in the territorial office. Someone with a stamp or a badge or a commission who made the paperwork clean and the investigations slow and the complaints disappear into drawers. "He has names," Haddon said. "He remembers too. He is not certain of the spelling. Tell me the sounds." Kesho said 2 names slowly, in the careful way of a man recalling something by sound rather than sight. One name Haddon didn't recognize. The other he did. Deputy Land Commissioner for the Southeastern Territorial District. A man Haddon had met once, years ago, during a martial inquiry that had gone nowhere. For reasons nobody had explained satisfactorily. He thought, there it is, he thought. This is bigger than I thought, he thought, which means we have to do this exactly right. They made camp that night on a flat shelf of rock above the desert floor. No fire. The situation had changed enough that caution was worth the cold. Kesho was set against the rock with a blanket, already half asleep from the effort of the day. The older scout sat nearby. Haddon sat apart, not to exclude himself from the group, just to think, which was the same thing he'd always done, and Rebecca had understood it better than anyone ever had or would. She'd bring him coffee sometimes, set it down without comment, walk away. Let him be in the silence without making the silence a problem, which was, in its quiet way, one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for him. He missed that, more than he's to anyone. More than he said to anyone, more than he'd said even to himself, because saying it directly made it too large to fit anywhere useful. He thought instead about the shape of what he knew and what he needed, and how to get from one to the other without anyone getting killed who didn't deserve it, and without creating the kind of secondary disaster that often did more damage than the original problem. Gideon Pruitt had to be taken intact, with evidence, in a way that couldn't be quietly dismissed by the officials he'd purchased. That meant documentation, testimony, the kind of paper trail that made it impossible for the people above this operation to deny knowing it existed. Which meant Haddon needed Pruitt's men alive and talking, and he needed to move before Pruitt came back from wherever he was and found his operation compromised, which meant 2 days, which was not enough time. But it was the time he had. Broken Arrow appeared beside him, sat, scat. Not the cross-legged position of the fire. Just sat, knees up, looking out at the desert below the rock shelf. The stars were thick overhead. The Milky Way a pale smear, from north to south. You're planning, the chief said. Trying to. You look worried. I am worried. About the canyon? The men? About after, Haddon said. About what happens when the immediate problem is solved, and people have to live with the fact that the immediate problem existed. Broken Arrow was quiet. My concern is the opposite, he said, eventually. What do you mean? You worry about your community's ability to absorb the truth. I worry about whether my people will ever see any benefit from the truth being known. Men like Pruitt are removed. Other men take the land. Other problems come. And we are still here, still small, still blamed for things that were done to us. He paused. This is not bitterness. This is history, I know. Do you? I've been watching that history operate for 20 years, Haddon said. From the inside of the institution that was supposed to prevent it and frequently made it worse instead. A silence. Why did you really leave the Marshal Service? Broken Arrow said. Haddon looked at the stars. I told you. My wife asked me to, that is true. But not complete, Haddon thought about it, decided the chief had earned the rest of it. There was an incident, he said. A family, Apache, down near the border. We were sent on a complaint from a rancher who said they'd stolen cattle and we went out. The family was there, father, mother, 4 children. No stolen cattle anywhere. The complaint was thin, very thin. But we'd ridden 4 hours, and the rancher was a man with political connections, and my senior officer wanted to make the trip worth something. He stopped. What happened, Broken Arrow said. We took 2 horses. Said it was compensation. Said the cattle could have been hidden. Said it was the fair resolution. Haddon's jaw tightened. I filed an objection in writing, which went into a drawer and stayed there. 6 months later, I met Rebecca. 2 months after that, she said she hadn't married a man who made his living getting shot at. And you had another reason to go. I had another reason to go. The chief was quiet for a while. You feel responsible, he said. For 2 horses, 14 years ago? For the pattern. For being part of it. Yes, you are not responsible for the pattern, Broken Arrow said. You were one man, in a system that would have continued without you and did. Continue without you. I know that. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. And I think you know that. Broken Arrow looked at him. Yes. I know that. A silence. Long. Comfortable, almost. In the way silences between 2 people can become comfortable when they've established enough ground truth about each other to rest in the spaces between words. My wife, Broken Arrow said. She used to say. She said that men who carry guilt over things they cannot change are men who believe they should have been more powerful than they were. And believing you should be more powerful than you are is a kind of vanity. Hadn't thought about that. That's harsh. She was a harsh woman in some ways. Kind in others. Usually right. The chief's voice held something. Not quite warmth. Not quite grief. The specific tone of loving something that is no longer there to be loved. She said the better use of guilt was to let it tell you what to do next. Not what you should have done. What you do now. Haddon sat with that for a while. What's her name, he said. Broken Arrow looked at him. Her name was Liluye. The chief said, that's a good name. Yes. Rebecca, Haddon said. Returning the offering, yes. The chief said just yes, which was enough. In the morning, they decided 2 things. The first, they would not act on the canyon for 3 days. 3 days to bring in more men, to contact Walt Ferris, to bring Tom Liddell's brother who had Texas Ranger training, to gather enough careful men to make the numbers work, without it becoming something that started a different kind of trouble. The second, Haddon would go back to Red Rock Flats. Return to normal routine. Give Pruitt nothing to worry about. This was the part that required the most care, because Haddon Briggs had never been a man whose face told comfortable lies. Rebecca had read him like a simple book, which had been annoying and reassuring in approximately equal measure. He was going to have to manage himself very carefully for 2 days. Then Broken Arrow pulled him aside before they separated. The 2 men stood a short distance from the others. There is one more thing, the chief said. Haddon waited. Kesho was not alone when he was taken. Something cold moved through Haddon. There was another man, Broken Arrow said carefully, a younger scout. Kesho does not know if he is still in the canyon. He was held in a different place. Kesho heard him once, heard his voice, through the rock, but did not see him. How long ago? 5 days. He does not know if. The chief stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to hadn't understood what the unfinished sentence contained. Understood why Broken Arrow couldn't say it out loud. Understood why it changed the timeline entirely. 3 days had just become 2. 2 days, Haddon said. Broken Arrow looked at him. We can't wait, 3, Haddon said. Not if there's someone still in that canyon. 2 days is not enough time to. It has to be. A silence. Broken Arrow looked at the ground, then the horizon, then Haddon. 2 days, he said. I'll be back before dawn on the second day, with enough men. The chief looked at him for a long moment. Not a question about the plan. A question about the man making the plan. Whether he could be relied upon to come back when he said he would, with what he said he would bring. Haddon held the look. I'll be here, he said. Broken Arrow nodded once, and Haddon turned south, toward Red Rock Flats, toward Gideon Pruitt's easy smile and heavy hand, toward the part of this that required him to sit across from a man who'd tried to have him killed and pretend nothing had changed. Pilgrim walked beside him without being asked. I know, Haddon said quietly. Just to the horse, just to himself, I know. But we have to go back first, Pilgrim snorted, kept walking. He came into Red Rock Flats from the South Road, just past midday. The town did what small towns did when a man they'd expected to die came back alive. It noticed, carefully, a woman on the boardwalk, who looked up, and then deliberately backed down at her basket. 2 men outside the saloon who stopped their conversation, and didn't resume it while he was in sight. He rode to his own livery first, settled Pilgrim in the roan, didn't rush, then walked up Main Street. He bought tobacco he didn't especially need from the general store. Gideon was behind the counter. Easy smile, immediate and automatic. The smile of a man who'd had decades of practice, making it look like it came from somewhere real. Haddon, the surprise in his voice well calibrated. Not too much, not too little. You made it back, said I would. You did. A pause. And the horse? Haddon set the coins on the counter. Got him back, he said. Gideon blinked, just once. Just briefly. Well, the smile re-established itself, possibly a half-second behind schedule. I'll be damned. How'd you manage that? Talked to the chief. Just talked. Just talked. Another small pause. Gideon leaned on the counter. And everything square? You're square with them? Far as I know. Haddon picked up his tobacco. Gideon's hand came across the counter. Not on Haddon's shoulder this time. Just extended for a handshake. Good to have you back, Gideon said. Haddon looked at the hand, took it, shook it. Let go. Good to be back, he said. He walked out into the sunlight, kept his pace even, kept his face still. Did not look at his own hand, which he badly wanted to do. The hand that had just shaken the hand of the man who'd arranged for Pilgrim to disappear, who'd expected Haddon to ride into Chiricahua territory and not come out, who was currently holding a younger Apache scout in a canyon 3 hours east and did not know that Haddon knew any of it. He walked to Walt Ferris's property. Knocked. Walt opened the door. Haddon said, quietly, I need to talk to you inside. Walt looked at his face, stepped back, let him in. He explained it carefully. All of it, the shoe print, the conversation with Broken Arrow, Kesho and what he'd heard, the canyon, the count of men and horses, and the name. Walt's face went through several stages at the mention of Gideon Pruitt, ending in the specific gray color of a man who has just understood something he cannot unlearn. He didn't argue, didn't say are you sure or that can't be right, just sat, just absorbed, then said, Tom's brother is in town, got in 2 nights ago, good. I need him and whoever else you trust completely, not almost. Completely, how many? 6. More is better, but 6 is enough if they're the right 6. Walt nodded slowly. Dawn in 2 days, dawn in 2 days. We leave before the town is up. Walt looked at him. You shook his hand, yes. How? Haddon was quiet for a moment. I thought about a woman, in a blue dress, standing in the dust at auction. Watching a horse, Walt didn't understand that. That was fine. Haddon stood up. 2 days. Get the men. Don't tell them more than they need to move, he left. Walked back through Red Rock Flats. nodded at people he passed, went home, fed Pilgrim, sat on the porch in the cooling evening light and thought about canyons and timing and what had to go right, thought about a younger scout, a name he didn't know yet. Someone sitting in the dark in a canyon 3 hours east, not knowing if anyone was coming. Someone is coming, he thought, not out loud, but firmly, like a promise made to a direction rather than to any specific person. Someone is coming. He went inside, ate, slept 3 hours, woke before dawn, started getting ready. They left before the town was breathing, 6 men, 7, counting Haddon. Walt Ferris rode on his left. Tom Liddell's brother, Cade, 29 years old, ranger trained and quiet in the specific way of men who have seen enough to stop explaining themselves, rode on his right. 4 ranchers behind them, men who'd lost horses, men who'd been angry in the directionless way of people who know something is wrong but can't find where to point the anger. Now they knew where to point it. Nobody talked about Gideon Pruitt by name on the ride out. Haddon had told each man separately, in private the night before. Had watched each face go through its stages. Had waited through the gray silence at the end and said, simply, I need you steady. I need you to ride out tomorrow like you're going to solve a problem, not like you're going to punish someone. Every man had nodded. Some had meant it. The ones who hadn't, he'd chosen not to take. The sky was that particular pre-dawn black that wasn't quite dark anymore. Stars still out but faint. The east showing just the suggestion of what was coming. Broken Arrow was waiting at the edge of the lower desert with 10 men. He saw Haddon first, then the group behind him, 7 unfamiliar riders. He held his position. Haddon raised his hand, open, palm forward. Broken Arrow raised his. They rode together to meet in the middle of the flat ground between the 2 groups. Just the 2 of them, side by side, both visible to both groups. This was intentional. This was the message they were sending to everyone behind them. We trust each other. Start from there. 7 Broken Arrow said, good men. Careful. Mine are 10, 17 total. Haddon looked at the chief. 12 in the canyon. Maybe more inside the structure. Better odds than yesterday. Much better. A pause. The young scout hadn't said any word. Broken Arrow's jaw tightened. Just slightly. No, just that. No, which was its own answer. Then we move, Haddon said. They rode together, all 17. 7 men from Red Rock Flats and 10 Chiricahua warriors in the pre-dawn dark, keeping a loose distance from each other. That wasn't hostility, but wasn't warmth either. The distance of strangers who share a problem and are finding the shape of what that means. Cade Liddell rode up beside Taza at some point. Haddon noticed it from ahead, didn't intervene, watched. The 2 young men rode in silence for a while. Then Cade said something tactical, about approach angles and terrain, the blunt direct question of a man who thinks in problems and solutions rather than pleasantries. Taza answered. Cade nodded. They kept riding, still not comfortable, but something had shifted. The acknowledgement of a shared problem was apparently its own small bridge, even between strangers. Walt, riding behind Haddon, said quietly, boy's going to be all right. Haddon didn't ask which boy. Yes, he said, both of them, probably. They stopped a quarter mile from the canyons. Haddon and Broken Arrow crouched over flat ground, while Haddon drew the layout from memory. Entrance from the west, narrow, canyon floor widening east. Structure built into the north wall, fire pit center. South rim lower and accessible. Broken Arrow corrected 2 details. The entrance was narrower than Haddon had estimated. 2 horses abreast, not 3. And there was a second guard position at the far eastern end of the canyon where the walls pinched back together. Discovered in the past 2 days. Critical information. The plan was not complicated. Complicated plans broke in the first 30 seconds of anything real. Apache from the south rim control the high ground, cut off escape upward. Haddon's men at the entrance block the exit. Move in from both directions. Controlled, steady, make the arithmetic obvious to every man in that canyon. Not a fight, a surrender. And Pruitt himself, Walt said quietly, he may not be there, but if he is. Haddon thought about Gideon Pruitt's hand on his shoulder. Heavy. Deliberate, then we take him alive. With everything intact, Cade checked his rifle, set it, checked it again. The habit of a man who made sure of things before he needed them. They moved into position. Broken Arrow's 10 men went south, wide, looping around the canyon's exterior to reach the lower rim without crossing the entrance sight lines. Moving through brush and rock in the dark with a practiced silence that Haddon respected completely. He gave them 20 minutes, sat with his group in the brush north of the entrance, waited. The canyon was quiet. The fire pit was burning low. Someone had fed it recently. The guards at the entrance, 2 of them, one on each side of the narrow passage, weren't alert. One was fighting sleep and losing. The other faced inward, watching the horses rather than watching for approach. Neither of them expected anyone. Because Pruitt believed Haddon was dead or at least neutralized. Because the operation had been running smoothly for months. Because men who have never been caught often make the mistake of believing they never will be. 20 minutes passed. Haddon looked at Cade. Cade held up one hand, closed it slowly. Ready, Haddon stood. Past 4 minutes were the 4 minutes he'd experienced in a long time. Not chaotic, just fast. The way well-planned things move when the planning holds. The guards were managed before they understood what was happening. Cade and one of Ferris's men, moving with the speed and silence of people who'd done this before, and then the 7 of them were inside the entrance and spreading. From the south rim, the sound of controlled movement. The horses reacted first. That sudden shift of collective attention, and the sound rippled through the camp and woke the sleeping men faster than any shout. Men coming out of the shelter, confused, reaching. Nobody moves, Haddon's voice. Not a shout projected. The particular voice of authority that doesn't need volume, because volume would imply uncertainty. People stopped. The arithmetic was immediately clear to anyone conscious enough to count. 7 men from the west. Apache warriors on the south rim above. More movement at the eastern pinch. Nowhere to go. 3 of Pruitt's men made different choices. One ran east, stopped when he saw the eastern position held, sat down on a rock with the expression of a man who was done. One reached for his weapon, and Cade disarmed him with an efficiency that made everyone nearby reconsider. One ran back into the shelter, which was where Haddon went. The structure was dim. Canvas roof, wood walls, cots and supplies, and a small stove and the particular smell of men living too close together for too long. The man who'd run in was pressed against the back wall, young, 22. Scared in the specific way of young men who have just discovered that the operation they joined isn't going to end the way they were told it would. Where's Pruitt? The young man swallowed. He left yesterday morning. Haddon went still. Left. Yes, sir. Had business in Tucson, Haddon said. Yes, sir, of course. Pruitt in Tucson, visiting the officials he'd purchased, ensuring the protection was still in place. Haddon had taken the bottom of the machine without the top. Think, the man you're holding. Haddon said. The Apache. The young man's face changed. Guilt, the specific variety of someone who hasn't done the thing directly but hasn't prent and said nothing. He's in the East End. He's in the East End. There's a, show me. The crevice was barely large enough. A natural gap in the canyon's east wall, widened slightly by hand. A rough door, planks and leather hinges. A bolt on the outside. Haddon slid the bolt, opened the door. Dark inside, then movement. Slow, careful. The movement of someone who had learned to be cautious about openings because openings had not historically meant good things. A young man, Apache, thinner than he should be. Eyes adjusting to the light, with the squinting effort of someone who hadn't seen full daylight in too long. He looked at Haddon, looked past him. And then he saw Taza, because Taza had come up beside Haddon without being asked, which was the right thing to do, which Taza seemed to know instinctively. And something in the young scout's face broke open. Nothing dramatic. Just the small, enormous breakage of a person who has been holding themselves together for a long time and has finally been given permission to stop. Taza went in. Haddon stepped back, gave them the space. Didn't watch. Some moments aren't for outside eyes. His name was Dolly. Taza told Haddon this after, while the rest of the situation was being sorted in the main canyon. Dolly, 19 years old, taken while scouting 8 days before Haddon had arrived at the camp. Kept in the crevice because they hadn't decided what to do with him. and because keeping him alive was a kind of insurance, and because, probably, some of the men in this operation still had enough conscience left to not want to add a worse thing to an already bad ledger. Dolly was thin, dehydrated, a cut on his forehead, healed rough, but standing, walking, alive. Broken Arrow came down from the south rim and saw Dolly and, for a moment, just a moment, the chief's face showed everything he had been carrying for the past 2 weeks, in the flat, controlled expression of a man who does not show what he carries. Then it was gone. Back to stillness, he put his hand on Dolly's shoulder, said something short. Dolly said something short back. Haddon didn't need to understand the words. The accounting took most of the morning. 28 horses total. Cade Liddell wrote down every brand with a stub of pencil on pages from a supply ledger. Each brand a ranch, each ranch a name, each name a man who had lost something and was going to get it back. 11 of Pruitt's men in custody. Sullen, mostly but not violent, men who had done the arithmetic and found it unfavorable. Haddon walked among them, looking for the one he needed. Found him against the north wall, with his hat over his face. 50-ish, weathered, the air of a man who knows when a situation is over. "You know who I am?" Haddon said. "You're the one who went into the Apache camp to get his horse back." "Yes, heard about that. Thought you were dead." "I almost was." The man told him what he needed to know. Pruitt had arranged it specifically. Had known Haddon would go after the horse. Had known what would likely happen when an armed rancher rode into Apache territory, angry and alone. Had planned for the valley to ignite. Had contacts ready to move on the land acquisition the moment any official conflict broke out. "The officials in Tucson," Haddon said. "I have 2 names. I need the rest." The man was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that Walt, standing 10 feet away, shifted his weight once. Then the man looked at his own hands. "I got a daughter," he said. "In Bisbee. 12 years old." Haddon waited. "I want her to know I did one right thing before the end of this." "Then do it," Haddon said. The man did. Haddon got out his pencil. Gideon Pruitt came back from Tucson 2 days later, rode into Red Rock Flats on the afternoon stage, stepped down with his leather case and his easy smile and his hat at the comfortable angle of a man who has no reason to believe anything has changed. 3 things changed his assessment. First, Sheriff Combs waiting at the stage stop. Unusual, because Combs was not the waiting type. Second, Walt Ferris standing across the street. Also unusual. Third, Haddon Briggs, sitting on the bench outside the barber shop. Just sitting. Looking at him. Pruitt stopped. The smile didn't change immediately. That was the impressive thing, Haddon would think later. The smile held for almost 3 full seconds after the rest of Pruitt's face understood the situation. 3 seconds of pure muscular habit. The infrastructure of 11 years of performance. Still running on its own momentum, while the mind behind it recalculated everything. Then the smile went, all at once. Like a lamp put out, Haddon stood, walked across the street, stopped 4 feet from Pruitt. "Gideon," he said. Pruitt looked at him, looked at Combs, looked back at Haddon. "You were supposed to." He stopped. "Be dead," Haddon said, quietly. "Not for the street, just for the 2 of them." Pruitt's jaw worked once. Then, "I don't know what you think. You put Pilgrim in Apache territory," Haddon said. "You expected me to ride in armed and angry and create an incident. You had land buyers lined up in Tucson. You had Commissioner Farrant ready to move on the acquisition within 48 hours of any official conflict between settlers and Apache. Silence. You had 11 men in a canyon 3 hours east holding stolen horses from 14 different properties. You had a 19-year-old Apache scout in a crevice in the rock. A pause. He's alive, by the way. In case you were wondering." Pruitt looked at him with the expression of a man who has spent 11 years building something and is watching it come down in under a minute. "How?" he said. "I talked to the chief," Haddon said. "Like I said I was going to." Combs came forward with the cuffs. Pruitt didn't run, didn't resist. Just stood there while Combs did what Combs was doing. Looking at Haddon, "You ruined it," Pruitt said, conversationally. The tone of a man discussing a business setback. It was going to work, Haddon. It was almost." "I know," Haddon said. "You know, it was a smart plan. Patient, well constructed." You had all the pieces in the right places. A pause. Except one, Haddon said. Pruitt looked at him. You didn't account for anyone talking to each other, Haddon said. You built the whole thing on the assumption that nobody ever would, that the distrust between settlers and Apache was permanent, fixed, that it was a wall you could always count on. Pruitt said nothing. Turns out, Haddon said, it's not a wall, it's a choice, and some people make different choices than you expected. Combs walked Pruitt toward the jail. At the door, Pruitt looked back. You're going to have trouble with the territorial officials, he said. Farrant has connections above. He had connections, Haddon said. Past tense. He resigned this morning. He paused. His office sent a wire. Apparently, someone provided documentation of his payment arrangements. Pruitt stared. I've been busy the past 2 days, Haddon said. The door closed. The street was quiet for a moment, then it wasn't, because that was how small towns worked. Silence, then the collective exhale. Then everyone suddenly, having somewhere to be and something to say. Haddon stood on the boardwalk, watched it happen, felt the specific tiredness of a man who has been running on purpose and problem for 4 days and has now arrived at the far side. Walt Ferris appeared beside him, said nothing. Just stood there, which was the right thing. After a while, Walt said, What happens now? Haddon explained what he could. The territorial court reviewing the land transfers. The ranchers who'd sold under duress. Some of them might be able to reclaim their properties, depending on the paperwork and who decided to pursue it. The Apache situation harder to resolve through legal channels, but the horses returned, and something else that he'd been building toward since a conversation at the edge of the desert. That morning I had a conversation with the chief this morning, Haddon said. Before I came back, the conversation had been simple in the way that important things sometimes are. Broken Arrow had taken a leather cord from inside his coat, thin, dark with age, knotted in the specific way of Chiricahua scouts, marking something found and being kept safe until its owner came, the same knot that had been on Pilgrim's neck. When we found your horse, Broken Arrow had said, we tied this on him, so that whoever came looking would know we understood what he was to them. Not just an animal, not just a possession. A pause, something carried. Haddon had looked at the cord. We did not know your wife's name, Broken Arrow had said. We did not know your story. But the horse kept looking back the way he came. We knew the story was there. We knew it mattered. Haddon had taken the cord. Lighter than it looked, the leather soft with age. Her name was Rebecca, he said. The chief nodded. Lilue would have liked that name. She liked names that ended softly, and that was all. That was everything. Haddon told Walt the shape of the agreement. Not all the details, because some things weren't for telling. The cord was not for telling, but the structure of it. A point of contact on each side, someone each community could reach when problems arose, who had met and sat at the same fire and eaten what was given. Not an arrangement, a relationship, which was different. Arrangements ended on paper. Relationships had to be broken, which was harder. People are going to have questions, Walt said. Yes, some of them aren't going to like it. Some of them won't. I know that. You're asking a lot. I'm not asking anyone anything, Haddon said. I made an agreement. I'm going to keep it. Other people can decide what they want to do. Walt was quiet. Then, Cade wants to know if the Apache scouts would be willing to. If there's a situation sometime, out east where local knowledge would. Talk to Taza, Haddon said. Walt blinked. They already talked on the ride out. They have a common language when it comes to terrain and tactics. Start there. Walt shook his head slowly. The expression of a man adjusting his picture of someone he thought he knew. That was fine. Haddon was used to that. He rode home in the late afternoon. Pilgrim beside him, no lead. The Chiricahua cord in his shirt pocket, where he could feel it with every stride. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the western hills. The house, the barn, the fence line with its long evening shadows. He'd built most of it himself. The house first, then the barn. Then the fence after Pilgrim arrived. Though containing Pilgrim had always been more theoretical than actual, he dismounted at the gate. Let Pilgrim walk ahead to the water trough. Stood with his arms on the top rail for a minute. The evening was settling, heat releasing, sky going gold then orange. The first few stars pressing through in the east, one by one, the way they always did out here. Like they'd been waiting for full dark to remember they existed. He took the Chickamauga cord from his pocket, looked at it. The knot in the center, tight and deliberate. The intention of someone who understood that certain things needed to be held safely until the right person came to claim them. He tied it to the fence rail beside the gate. Not on the horse anymore. On the fence, where he would see it every morning when he came out to check on Pilgrim. Where it would be there in the ordinary light of ordinary days, doing what it had always done, marking something as worth keeping, worth coming back to. He stood there for a while, the mind doing that thing it does after large events, not processing so much as slowly settling the way disturbed water settles, finding its level. He thought about Rebecca without trying not to. That was new, not new like something sudden, new like something that had been working its way loose for a while and had finally come free. The thought of her arriving without the immediate pain behind it. Not painless, but present. The way the scar from a deep cut eventually becomes part of the skin rather than an absence in it. He thought about $43, a gray colt in a pen in Tucson, a woman in a blue dress, said nothing, which was how she said everything. You couldn't afford that horse, he thought. Not in accusation, just as a fact. Between the two of them, the way you can only say true things to people who already know them. No, he answered himself. But I bought him anyway. The stars were coming out in earnest now. Pilgrim moved to the center of his enclosure, turned a slow circle the way horses do before they settle, and lay down. The gray horse in the evening light, the dark stripe on his nose, looking up at nothing particular, with the expression of an animal that has arrived at the end of a long, long day and found the day sufficient, found it enough. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in August, Haddon rode northeast. Not with urgency, not with weapons beyond the standard. Just to ride. He rode past the place on the ridge where he'd first seen the Chickamauga camp, past the flat ground where 17 riders had come together in the pre-dawn dark, past the arroyo where he'd camped with no fire and thought about patterns. He wasn't going to the canyon. He'd made a different turn an hour back, and he knew without consciously deciding where he was going. The camp was there. Same wickiups. Same position. Taza met him at the same rise. He's expecting you, Taza said. Which meant Broken Arrow had seen him coming for the last 20 minutes. Which meant Haddon realized they had been expecting him, not on this specific day, but in the general direction of one day, which was what a relationship looked like. You rode toward each other without having to announce it first. He rode down into the camp. Broken Arrow was at the fire, 2 cups. Already Haddon dismounted, sat down, took the cup. The coffee was strong and bitter and made with water that tasted of the local rock. But it was hot, and it was offered. And those 2 things were all that was actually required of a cup of coffee. They sat. The fire. Between them the desert open in every direction, wide and red and full of things that had figured out how to survive on. Very little. Your valley is quieter, Broken Arrow said. People are settling. It'll take time. Always does. They talked for a while about the practical things. The territorial court moving on the land transfers. Ferrant cooperating now that Pruitt's protection was gone. The list of payments long enough to keep several officials very busy for a very long time. Then silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that had become, over the past weeks, the comfortable proof of something, that 2 men could sit together without performing conversation. Broken Arrow nodded. They sat a while longer. Pilgrim stood nearby. Not tied, not going anywhere. Once or twice the gray horse turned his head and looked back southeast toward home, toward the ranch, toward home, and then looked forward again with the direction he was currently pointed, which was east, into the morning, into whatever came next. Haddon rode home in the afternoon. The valley spread below him, on the descent. The ranches, the town, the thin line of the creek, the ordinary geography of ordinary life, small and specific and his. He passed the spot where he'd found the shoe print, didn't stop, noted it, rode on, past the dry creek bed, past the scrub brush, came to the edge of his property. The gate was closed, exactly as he'd left it. Pilgrim walked beside him with the easy confidence of a horse who has been many places and returned and knows the returning. Haddon dismounted, opened the gate, walked through, turned to close it. And there on the fence rail, right where he'd tied it 3 weeks ago, in the evening with the first stars coming out, the Chiricahua, cord, dark with age, knotted at the center, still there, still holding. He put his hand on it for a moment, not removing it, just acknowledging. The way you acknowledge a thing that is doing exactly what it was meant to do. Then he walked Pilgrim to the barn, fed him, put the kettle on, sat on the porch with his coffee while the sun went down, and thought about tomorrow, what it would look like, what it would need from him, what he could give it that he couldn't have given 3 weeks ago, before a gray horse disappeared on a Tuesday morning in July and dragged him, reluctant and necessary, back into the world. Think slow, he thought, move careful, but move. The stars came out, not all at once, one at a time, the way most things worth keeping arrive.